The quiet morning in Glendale shifted the moment the three motorcycles roared into view. The cafe, usually filled with laughter and the gentle clinking of cups, fell silent as the riders stopped abruptly in front of the entrance. Their engines cut off with a jarring finality, and all eyes turned to them. Zeus, Michael's ever-vigilant guide dog, was the first to sense the disturbance. His ears twitched, his body tensed, and his eyes locked onto the intruders. Michael, seated at his usual spot, felt the change immediately. His hand rested on Zeus's neck, and the subtle shift in his companion's posture told him everything. Something wasn't right. The leader of the group, Chuck, strode inside. His boots thudded heavily against the floor, each step deliberate. His leather jacket was patched with symbols, his grin a mix of amusement and menace. He scanned the room like a predator surveying its prey before his gaze landed on Michael and Zeus. "Nice dog," Chuck said, his voice loud enough to dominate the hushed cafe. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the table. "What's his deal? Guard dog? He looks like he could tear someone apart." Michael's calm tone cut through the tension. "He's my guide dog. Helps me navigate the world I can't see." Chuck chuckled, leaning in to inspect Zeus. "Bet he's expensive. Well-trained, too. Must be nice to have a bodyguard on four legs." Zeus didn't move, but his presence was electric. His posture was rigid, his focus unyielding. He wasn't just watching, he was calculating. Chuck raised a hand, as if to test the dog's limits, but stopped short when Zeus's head shifted ever so slightly, his eyes locking onto Chuck's with an intensity that made the man hesitate. The cafe felt like it was holding its breath. A waitress near the counter froze mid-step, her eyes darting between Zeus and the intruders. Other patrons whispered nervously or tried to inch away without drawing attention. The air was thick with unspoken fear. "You've got yourself a hell of a dog," Chuck said, his bravado faltering just enough to be noticeable. One of his lackeys laughed nervously, trying to fill the silence. "Careful, Chuck," he joked. "Looks like that mutt's got your number." Zeus's gaze never wavered. He didn't growl or bark, he didn't need to. The sheer force of his presence was enough to send a clear message: one wrong move, and you'll regret it. Michael, sensing the weight of the moment, ran his fingers along Zeus's collar. His voice remained steady, though his grip tightened slightly. "Easy, Zeus. It's fine. We're fine." But they weren't. Chuck's irritation was growing. He stepped even closer, now towering over Michael. Zeus rose slowly to his feet, his movements deliberate. The muscles in his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash. His lips curled back slightly, just enough to reveal a glimpse of sharp teeth. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every pair of eyes was on the dog, waiting for what would happen next. Chuck's companions shifted uneasily, their earlier bravado replaced with doubt. Even Chuck seemed to hesitate, his confidence cracking under the weight of Zeus's silent threat. And then, as if the entire cafe held its breath at once, Zeus took a single step forward. Zeus's growl lingered in the air as the trio reached the door, but Chuck hesitated, his pride clearly wounded. He turned back, fury burning in his eyes. "You think this is over? You don't know who you're messing with." One of the cafe patrons, a middle-aged man in a suit, whispered to Michael, "They might come back. You should leave, before it gets worse." Michael shook his head, his jaw tight. "I'm not running. Zeus and I face challenges every day. This won't be any different." Outside, the sound of roaring engines erupted as the bikers revved their motorcycles. But instead of leaving, they circled back, stopping just outside the cafe. Chuck pulled out his phone, made a quick call, and within minutes, more bikes appeared. 4, 5, 6 riders joined them, their headlights piercing through the cafe windows like ominous eyes. Zeus bristled, his ears twitching as he picked up on the growing danger. Michael could feel the shift in his companion's body, the tension mounting like a coiled spring. The cafe owner, a petite woman named Linda, approached Michael. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice shaking. "No time," Michael replied. "They're here now." The door burst open, and Chuck strode back in, flanked by 2 burly men who looked more like bouncers than bikers. The cafe's atmosphere shifted from tense to suffocating. "This place is ours now," Chuck declared, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Anyone who doesn't like it can leave, or face the consequences." The patrons froze, their fear palpable. But Michael stood, his hand steady on Zeus's harness. "You don't own anything here. And if you're smart, you'll walk away." Chuck laughed, a hollow, menacing sound. Big words for a blind man. He turned to one of his goons. "Teach him a lesson." The man advanced, but Zeus was faster. In a blur, the dog intercepted him, his powerful jaws snapping inches from the man's leg. The attacker stumbled back, tripping over a chair and crashing to the floor. The room erupted into chaos. One of the bikers flipped a table, sending cups and plates flying. Zeus darted through the chaos, positioning himself between Michael and the attackers. Linda screamed as another biker grabbed her arm, but a brave patron threw a coffee pot at the man, forcing him to let go. Zeus, sensing the danger, leapt onto the counter, barking ferociously to protect the bystanders. Michael, despite his blindness, moved with purpose. Guided by Zeus's cues and the sounds around him, he picked up a chair and swung it in the direction of the commotion, forcing another attacker to retreat. Suddenly, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Chuck's bravado faltered as the bikers exchanged nervous glances. "You called the cops?" Chuck shouted, his voice tinged with panic. Linda stepped forward, holding her phone defiantly. "You bet I did. And they're almost here." Zeus stood tall on the counter, his presence commanding. The bikers began to back away, their confidence crumbling under the weight of the growing resistance. "This isn't over." Chuck spat, retreating toward the door. "You'll regret this." As the bikers fled, the cafe erupted into cheers. Zeus jumped down from the counter, returning to Michael's side. The blind man knelt, wrapping his arms around his loyal companion. "You saved us, boy," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us all." Before the sound of the motorcycles faded completely, an eerie sense of unease filled the cafe. Something wasn't right. Zeus was agitated, his ears moving frantically as if he could hear things no one else could. Michael, sensing the change in his dog's behavior, tightened his grip on the leash. "They're gone, but Zeus is still tense," Michael said softly, almost to himself. Linda, the cafe owner, glanced out the window. "They haven't really left," her voice trembled as she pointed to the corner. There they were. Not just Chuck and his gang, but more motorcyclists. 10, maybe 15, all parked strategically in front of the cafe, blocking the exits. A black truck appeared out of nowhere, parking in the middle of the street, creating an even tighter barricade. Chuck got off his bike, now with a dangerous grin. He held a chain in his hand, and his expression made it clear he wasn't joking. "You think you beat me? That was just the warm-up." Zeus took a step forward, growling low. Michael stayed calm, but deep inside, he knew it wasn't good. There was no way out this time. "Linda," Michael said calmly, "lock the door." "Now." She obeyed, but Chuck laughed. "Lock the door. You think that will stop us?" He signaled, and 2 men from the gang got off the truck, bringing tools. Within seconds, they started forcing the door open. Inside the cafe, panic spread. Some customers were crying, others tried desperately to find an escape through the back, but found the motorcyclists had surrounded the building. There was nowhere to run. Michael stood, gripping Zeus's leash with one hand and his cane with the other. He turned toward the sounds. "What do you want? Money? This doesn't have to go further." Chuck answered with contempt. "It's not about money. It's about respect. You and that dog, you disrespected me. And now, I'm going to make sure no one dares to do the same." At that moment, Zeus took a step back, pulling Michael along with him. One of the front windows of the cafe was shattered by a chair thrown from outside. The noise echoed, and chaos intensified. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching caught everyone's attention. A black car appeared on the scene, stopping abruptly in front of the cafe. The door opened, and a man in a suit stepped out, looking completely out of place in this scene. He held a radio in one hand and a briefcase in the other. "Chuck," the man said in a firm voice, "this is not part of your plan. Back off now." Chuck looked at him, confused. "Who the hell are you?" The man ignored the question, pressing a button on the radio. Within seconds, a drone appeared in the sky, hovering above the cafe. A red light blinked on the device, and a robotic voice rang out, "Move away immediately, or measures will be taken." The motorcyclists hesitated, some already backing off, but Chuck didn't. He shouted, "You think this is going to stop me?" and moved toward the door. That's when Zeus sprang into action. In a calculated move, the dog leaped at the door, intercepting Chuck before he could pass. The impact was brutal, and Chuck fell backward, dropping the chain. Meanwhile, the drone began emitting loud sounds like an alarm, drawing the attention of neighbors and other shopkeepers. Lights started turning on in nearby buildings, and some people began filming the scene with their phones. The man in the suit moved closer to Michael. "My name is Alan. I've been sent to help. You and Zeus are more important than you think." Michael frowned. "What do you mean? Who are you?" "We don't have time for explanations now," Alan replied. "But trust me, this isn't just about a gang of bikers. There's something much bigger at play, and you're at the center of it." Before Michael could respond, a scream came from outside. Chuck was on his feet again, and this time, he was holding something far more dangerous, a gun. "This ends now," Chuck shouted, aiming the gun at the cafe. The drone, sensing the threat, adjusted its position, but before it could act, Zeus made an impossible leap. In a move that seemed rehearsed, the dog grabbed Chuck's arm, making the gun fall to the ground. Chaos reached its peak. The bikers started fleeing, realizing the situation had spiraled out of control, but Chuck resisted, fighting against Zeus. Alan pulled Michael back, shielding him as the police finally arrived, sirens blaring down the street. The officers jumped out of their vehicles with weapons drawn, ordering everyone to the ground. Chuck, seeing he was surrounded, finally gave up. Zeus released his arm but didn't take his eyes off him until the police cuffed him. Inside the cafe, silence returned, but everyone knew this was only the calm before the next storm. Alan turned to Michael, his expression serious. "This isn't over," he said. "And you need to be ready for what comes next."